Imagine you are a slave in 1850 America. You are subject to forced labor for the benefit of your master. You may be subject to beatings and privations. You may even be forcibly separated from your family, your wife and children. Or even think about the modern political context. Obviously not as severe as slavery, but still deeply troubling in many ways. Forced wealth transfers are expanding rapidly and threatening to push the nation into bankruptcy. The federal government wants to force you to purchase health insurance. And indeed, Elena Kagan recently suggested that the federal government could even force you to eat your fruits and vegetables. Practically any activity you undertake, whether it's to use or produce energy, or life-saving drugs, or even to speak your mind in public about political races. These activities are largely controlled by politicians and bureaucrats. So what do we say in response to these oppressive controls? Typically, the first thing we will do is invoke our rights. Our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this raises a critical question. Where do our rights come from? One suggestion from the Declaration is that our rights might be self-evident. But this seems not to be the case. After all, modern humans have been around for some 200,000 years. And yet Greek philosophy is only about 2,500 years old. And we've had serious discussions of rights only since that period. So apparently rights have not been self-evident through most of human civilization. Some argue that rights are essentially a matter of personal whim. In other words, might makes right. But this isn't a theory of rights, it's really an obliteration of rights. It's basically saying if one person wishes to abuse somebody or take their stuff, they will probably do so. And yet some would simply replace the whim of the individual with society's whims and say that our rights are subject to majority rule, which of course is transient. In this scheme, our rights basically become two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. There's another suggestion of where rights come from, suggested in the Declaration, which is that we are endowed by our Creator with rights. But this has one initial problem, which is to establish the existence of God. Now, of course, that's far too broad of a topic for today's short speech. But I will say a few words about a second problem with this approach of saying that God grants us our rights, which is how do we know which rights God grants us? And let's just take a couple of examples. Consider abolition. It is true, many abolitionists were deeply religious, and they stated their position in religious terms. But it's also true at the same time that many Christians invoked the Bible in support of slavery. Consider a line from Leviticus. You may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are round about you. Or consider forced wealth transfers. Some argue that the Bible endorses free market capitalism. And yet the entire religious left, the Catholic establishment, and indeed the overwhelming majority of Christians, including ones that call themselves conservatives, advocate a robust welfare state with forced wealth transfers. And they do so on explicitly biblical principles. So the problem with saying that God grants us our rights is that they basically boil down to claims of earthly authorities of God's who proclaim themselves to be God's representatives. But there is an alternative to those theories of rights, which is simply natural rights, which is also mentioned in the Declaration when it talks about the laws of nature. Obviously, I have time only for a brief synopsis of what a natural rights theory would consist of, but I'll hit a few highlights just to get us rolling. Each individual properly pursues his life and happiness, as Ayn Rand argued. In order to do this, in order to achieve our life and pursue our happiness, we have to apply our reasoning mind to the problems of survival. And we have to live our lives according to that. Moreover, we need to apply our reason to the realm of production in order to sustain ourselves physically. Even free speech always has a physical manifestation. So we must be free to develop and use property. One critical aspect of human reason is that it is that which enables us to not only create wealth, but to interact voluntarily, to trade a mutual advantage. We're not limited to the law of the jungle, where I snatch the food out of your mouth. We create and then trade wealth. Of course, to accomplish these things, to pursue our lives in happiness, to use our property, we have to have the liberty to do so, to act on our judgment, to to use our property, and to interact with others voluntarily. Furthermore, for me to advance my rights, I have to advance rights universally. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So of course that's only the first hint of a natural rights theory. But in order to fully restore the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, we must fully learn where rights come from. And then we must advocate rights and make them central to the course of human events. Thank you.